welcome to the Turning Keys podcast, the place where I will share the insights and tools that have helped me in my journey, and maybe it can help you too or serve you somehow. I am Inara Satan, and I'm glad to be here. The first thing I'd like to address is that I'm Brazilian, so you're gonna hear some accent. You don't need to wonder where I'm coming from. Now you know. We can move on with our lives. Um, I'm from the interior of São Paulo, and in my town, like every town, we have cemeteries. But there is something very particular about one of our cemeteries. By its doors, we have a Latin quote that reads, Memento Mori. Memento Mori means remember that you're mortal. Which, in my opinion, is something pretty cool to write in a cemetery's door. Makes a lot of sense, but also, kind of creepy. And some people live by this concept, like the carpeting concept, that if you are fully aware that you're going to die, then you will live your life to the fullest. But I am not one of those people. For me, the idea of death will never make me want to live my life. It will just make me terrified and scare the hell out of me, literally, because I was raised Christian. I was taught how to fear hell. And, the ticket to hell is dying. And I didn't want to do that. I was, in this vibe when I was a kid, and I would be before sleeping, laying down on my bed, thinking about what if? What if on this 50% chances I end up going down? And I was fearing this so much. And now I became familiar with the term God fearing. And I noticed that these people, they're not fearing God. They're fearing hell. And ultimately, they're fearing themselves. Which I get it. We fear what we don't understand. And sometimes the logic behind of it is not pretty clear. I remember going to church and then saying that if I was a good person and I do the right things, then I'll go to heaven. Simple like that. End of story. But what would scare me about this? It was not the overwhelmingly long list of good things I must do, because I was always a rule follower anyways. What would truly scare me was the fear of being handed the wrong list, because we'll be there talking mission and saying how we need to convert the Muslims. They are serving the wrong God. And I'll be like, oh my God, what if I die and find out that the Muslims were right? And we had a habit of praying every night before bed and asking God to forgive our sins. And I was like 6 years old. God knows how many sins I had, but it was still a habit of ours. And I remember that once I did something in the morning. I think I lied to somebody. And lying was a clear sin that I was surely going to apologize at that time, but something started to bug me. I was like, what if I die in the afternoon? And I didn't have time to ask for forgiveness. And that was bugging me, and I couldn't take it anymore. I ended up asking my mom, hey, Mom, if we sin in the morning and we didn't make it into bedtime to ask for forgiveness because we died in the afternoon, are we going to hell? And my mom, and all of her wisdom, looked at me and said, yes. And I was scared, and I was like, oh my God, I'm certainly going there. There's no way to escape it. And I grew up like this. I would follow this list, not because I was fully believing in it, but because it was the only thing presented to me at the time. And when puberty hit, and it's that phase where everybody wants to, prove their identity, I will feel so different from everybody I knew. And I will be angry at God. I'll be like, why do you create people that are so different? and make them be all the same. Just create everybody the same already. Save my time and save me the effort. And I was carrying those conflicts for a long, long time and always thinking about, okay, this is not for me, doesn't make sense to me, but what I'm going to do without it? I can't be out there. I can't face hell. And then I was in college on my first semester. I was presented to a book on sociology class. And I feel like this book was what it took for me to leave church for sure. It was called Discipline and Punish by Foucault. And this book, it talks about how our society has mechanisms to control us. And it always had. But before, those mechanisms were more external. People were burned, people were hanged. And ultimately, all those mechanisms were internalized as guilt, shame. And there is an example that I like that when cities were small, there was towers. And on those towers, people would be watching and seeing who commit any crime or, disobey the law. But as the cities grew and grew, the towers couldn't reach everybody anymore. This tower is inside of our own heads. We are the agents responsible to punish and discipline ourselves and our peers to make everybody follow the rules. And the institutions that he mentions are the schools, the hospitals, the prisons, the military or the government, and factories, which nowadays will be corporate. But I remember that in our class, we read this book and we had each group doing a presentation about it. And there was the 5 chapters and 2 different themes that would intercalate with the book. That was family and church. And guess what? My group got it. Of course, church. And I don't know, by studying it and by learning more about it, I was rebel. I was like, okay, so there is no God. There's just society trying to control me. And by that moment, I became an atheist because I couldn't separate religion from spirituality. So if that religion didn't make sense to me, it's because they're trying to control me. They're trying to make me a cattle, and I didn't want that. So therefore, this was all a lie, and God is an invention. And I remember being really angry, and I'm not against church. I just want to point that out. I am against the ignorance, right? So if you're going to church and that makes you feel like you love yourself more, that you love your peers more, to have more compassion, then you were doing church right. But that was not my case. I was just feeling guilt and feeling ashamed and feeling that God was holding unachievable standards. And that was making me sad. I would feel like there was this box and I would never fit in. But I've seen people fitting in and actually changing for good. I've seen people building a sense of community and that nurtures their soul. But what I don't believe is that it's one way. It's something that you hear there. Oh, that's the only way. That's the only way. I don't believe in that. I believe it's the way for some people, but it's not the way from everybody. And I don't think that if you find another way, then you're doing some harm, right? So I don't like when people try to exclude or have prejudice against people that doesn't fit in the box. I feel like we all need to respect the choices that we make to try to be a better person. But back to the Memento Mori quote. I was introduced to that when I was 20, and it was just in my atheist phase. Oh, remember that you're mortal. And I'll be like, yeah, this doesn't scare me anymore. But the scary thing became that I kind of started to flirt with the idea of dying, like being dead would answer all my questions and solve all my problems. I got into a deep, deep depression, and anything else made sense. I remember that I would struggle just to get out of bed. And this was a little over 10 years ago. We didn't talk about mental health like we do now. So it took me a long time to realize something was odd with me. I think I started to notice when I was driving to work and I would park in front of my job and I would be unable to get out of my car. I just couldn't. I couldn't open the door and go to work. And some days I would be late. Some days I would just make my boyfriend at the time call the school with an excuse telling I couldn't go. And after he did that, and okay, I called him, you good. I will feel a moment of relief, like I don't have to deal with this today, but I will feel immediately worse because I knew the next day I will have to deal with the shame of not showing up. And that was the first thing I started to notice. But I thought that I just didn't like working there, right? So I ended up quitting my job and I was jobless, living with my mom. And I started to notice that basic things became really difficult for me. I couldn't eat. I didn't have any appetite. I didn't want to go out. And the most alarming thing, I didn't want to shower. And you need to understand that we are talking about Brazil here, right? Brazil is basically summer all year long. People need to shower. We don't have even air conditioning in most houses. It was a necessity. And I was neglecting it. I couldn't. And nobody understood. I would say like, oh, I don't want to do this. And I just want to die and I didn't want to do anything. But for some reason, I never thought about killing myself. I would think about, I hope this happened to me, but I wouldn't do the action that it takes. And I think that's something good because if I had this in me, I'll probably, wouldn't be here now. And I'm glad to be here. But I was in that moment basically dead. And the idea of death stopped being a fear and starting to feel like a hope. And in this low vibration, I was then introduced to the dark side of spirituality. I'm going to talk about more of this in the future, but for this moment, let's just say that I was having episodes that I couldn't explain at the time because I just didn't deny the existence of God. I denied the existence of anything that I couldn't perceive with my five senses. So if I couldn't see, if I couldn't reach, if I couldn't smell, if I couldn't feel, then it didn't exist. And the explanation that I had for the things I was facing at the time was that I was schizophrenic, because that was what the science could tell me, right? I was kind of convinced that I was schizophrenic, and I was thinking about going to a psychiatrist to get me the medication and feel normal again. I have an uncle that is schizophrenic as well. But one day, something happened. I was convinced that my mind was creating all of those hallucinations and visions and all of that and voices. But I was sitting in a car and I was really weird. Like I was feeling not myself, like I was incorporated by somebody else. And I was sitting in this car and then I looked at my boyfriend at the time and said, "Hey, one of mine own will come by. And within 30 seconds, a guy out of nowhere started to knock on my car and wave at me, smiling and happy. And I was waving back, and we were like bonding. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I can be schizophrenic. I can be creating a parallel universe in my head, but how can I make other people do that? How can I predict that this person is going to come and wave at me and we are going to bond? So that turned the key for me because I understood that not everything was in my head, that there was a spiritual world and there were spiritual forces acting. And if I was seeing the bad side of it, so the good side of it must exist, had to exist. And it was not a linear process. It's not like, oh, okay, so the good side exists and then angels came and sang my name. That didn't happen. But that turned the key and opened the door for the many, many process that I was going to live in the coming years. And I feel that the idea of time we have, like this line, it doesn't make sense. And I don't know how to explain how time is, but I was thinking about an analogy. It was like when our ancestors were navigating through the ocean to find another continent and find food, spices. They had this idea that the world was flat because it was all they could see, a flat line by the end of horizon, right? And yes, in the 21st century, there's people that still believe the world is flat, but let's not go there. Let's talk about how one day someone realized, wow, this is endless. This is not flat. This is in a sphere. So there is no beginning or ending to Earth. And I feel like time is like that. Time is not a line. Time is like a spiral with no beginning, with no ending, with no middle. And if you're lucky and you're healthy, you're going to live a little over 100 years old on this planet, right? And how can this 100 and so years old define what eternity looks like for you? Do you think that when you compare it to eternity, this 100 years on earth was enough for you to develop and learn everything you needed to learn to just be chilling in heaven or suffering in hell? I think it's kind of pretentious. Like, we're talking about eternity. Eternity, people. It's like you get a glass of water from the ocean and say, yeah, this defines all the oceans. Like, it doesn't. It's eternity, has no beginning, has no ending, has no middle. We are not living on a flat planet on the same way we are not living on a time that is just a line. In 2021, I was walking with my friend and I was really upset because I recently have been through a breakup. And I feel like the pandemic had the potential to make some relationships stronger, but also end a lot of relationships because some relationships are distractions. People get into relationships just to distract them for something that they don't want to deal with it. But when the world literally stops and say, hey, stay at home and deal with you have in there, we just couldn't. We end up breaking up. And even though I know it was the right thing to do because we weren't compatible and we didn't bring the best in each other, I was still upset. And I was talking about life, and, my friend was talking about her situation as well. And by the middle of our walking, I saw a pillar And there were two words written in it. It was acha chave, which means find the key in Portuguese. And there was a key hanging in there. And then I took the picture of the key and I told my friend, wow, maybe we should talk about this. Maybe we should talk about our experiences and the breakthroughs we had. And I don't know, maybe some people would like to hear that, or some people can relate to that. And I was, engaged by it, and it was something that was going to happen, and that made me excited for a moment, but I forgot about it on the next week, and I put this project on pause, or not even pause, stopped, to be honest. It's like, okay, it was a good idea. That is never going to happen. And 4 years later, look at me. This project came like a phoenix. I was reading a book this week, and in this book, the guy left the city and went to live in the mountains because he was feeling overwhelmed by the city lifestyle. He hated his job, he hated his town, and he wanted to be more in touch with the nature. But the minute he gets there, he's living in this cabin and he has, no distraction because there is no job to hate, there's no neighbors to hate, there's no traffic. So he is forced to look at himself, and he hates what he sees. He was like, dang. So the problem was not everyone that I was blaming. The problem was me, because I'm still here. I am by myself in the woods and I feel empty. And this guy started then to talk about his emptiness on a video, and that touches some people. And I was like meditating this week because I feel like in a good point of my life now, where I have a job that I like, where I feel like I'm building something that I believe. I have a son that I love. And I was feeling so empty. And I was trying to understand, why do I feel like this? And I closed my eyes to meditate. And I swear to God, in less than 2 minutes, that picture that I took with the key when I was walking with my friend 4 years ago came to me. And I heard turning the keys. And I immediately knew this was something I needed to do, that this was a podcast or something that I must record. And I don't know, guys, I feel that this is not our first rodeo on Earth. This is not our first time here. We've been here before, and we will probably be here again in the future. So I like to think on this Memento Mori thing differently. I don't think remembering that we are mortals help us. What I think that truly helped me was to understand that I am immortal. And not that I am immortal in a sense that I'm going to live 100 years if I'm lucky, and then that's it. My fate will be sealed forever. I like to think that I am immortal in a way that even when my body doesn't function anymore and I, am not alive on this planet, my spirit will still have the opportunity to learn, to change, to evolve wherever it goes. So I would like to end this episode saying, Memento immortalitatis. Remember that you are immortal, because you are. Thank you for your time. See you.